Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we start, I want to thank Mitsu Iwasaki for becoming our newest Patreon supporter. There's a long list of people who support the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon, and there are a lot of different benefits that come with that, from videos to behind-the-scenes newsletters to discounts at the Mountain and Prairie shop. Long list of stuff. If you want to learn more about that or options for one-time support, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Francie Ashforth. Francie is an artist who specializes in drawing, printmaking, and painting. While much of her work is tied to the landscapes and rivers of the American West, she's also well known for her depictions of salt flats and coastal weather in more tropical locales. If there are two threads that bind all of Francie's work, they are her deep reverence for natural landscapes and her desire to protect them. Over the years, she's collaborated with many highly regarded conservationists to combine writing and art, first in her Water and Words project, and most recently when she created all of the art for Dylan Tomine's excellent new book, Headwaters. Francie was born and raised on the East Coast into a family of artists and athletes who cultivated her obsessions with art and perpetual physical activity. Even though a childhood accident confined her to a body brace for nearly 6 years, Francie always pursued her passions with full enthusiasm and vigor, working hard to keep a positive attitude in the face of such a serious physical setback. But her commitment to creativity never wavered. After studying art and architecture in college, she worked professionally as both an architectural illustrator and an art director for more than a decade. Eventually, she left her day job to focus on her own artistic endeavors, as well as her all-important role as a mother to young children. Today, Francie's work has been shown in venues from New York City to San Francisco, and she has a loyal following among galleries and collectors across the country. Francie and I met through past podcast guest Dylan Tomine when I had the pleasure of interviewing both of them at a live event in Brooklyn earlier this year. I was immediately impressed with Francie's art, her obsession with fly fishing and books, and her long-term commitment to melding art and conservation. So I was thrilled when she agreed to join me on the podcast, and we managed to cover a lot. We talked about her childhood and her family's influence, and her early career that combined art and architecture. We talked about the specifics of her art, including her influences and her preferred mediums, and we also talk in detail about her Water and Words project. We talk a lot about the book Headwaters, as well as her own love of books and reading. Francie offers a long list of great book recommendations, so be sure to check out the episode notes for links to all those and everything else we discuss. Huge thanks to Francie for all she does for conservation and for taking the time to chat with me. Hope you enjoy. Francie, thank you so much for joining me. We met in New York at Dylan's event, which was awesome. And that was when I first really got introduced to your work. And since then, we've hit it off, me and you and me and your husband. And it's just been so fun getting to know everything about you and your journey as an artist. And so I was thinking for this conversation, it might be best just to start at the very beginning. And so could you tell me a little bit about where you grew up?
First off, I want to say thank you, Ed, for having me. It's been really fun to get to know you over the past few months. I guess it's been since April. Huge fan of the podcast, and yeah, super honored to be here. And so I grew up in Connecticut, still live there most of the time, but spent a great deal of time at my grandparents' farm in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, overlooking the Connecticut River. And that was a huge part of my art, landscape, and stewardship of the land sort of upbringing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've told you this before, but when I think about you, I think about your love of the land, your love of conservation, love of wild places, and then I obviously think about your art. And so we'll talk more about the conservation side of things, but I want to hear more about where your artistic streak came from, because sometimes when I'm talking with artists, they have parents or families, or they grew up in situations where there's no art, no creativity of any kind, and then some grew up where they're completely surrounded by art. And I think about it kind of as a spectrum. And so where were you on that spectrum? What kind of creativity was going on in your household?
Oh my gosh, everybody. My mom was a sculptor. Her twin sister, my aunt, was a printmaker and a beautiful draftsman. She really taught me the fine art of drawing a line. And my grandmother was a painter. My other aunt was a painter as well. And just cousins and who were ceramicists, art teachers, art professors, grandparents that were woodcutters. My dad actually was a woodworker. That was sort of his hobby side of his life. So yeah. And everybody shared stuff when we all got together. And I have 15 first cousins. We'd all come together and bring our sketchbooks and share things.
And so when you were a kid, I mean, I was a pretty artistic kid. I used to, art was always my favorite class, and I was always drawing. I think back about how I would sit in my room for just hours and hours and hours and draw. And then I don't really know what happened, but next thing you know, I'm wearing a suit and working at Merrill Lynch. so I don't tell, and I don't really know when I got off of that path. And so like when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? I mean, what like was it always artsy?
Yes, but I was also well, they sort of said I had ants in my pants. I was moving all the time. So I was also an athlete. I mean, I was a runner and a ski racer and a tennis, I was on a tennis team, and I did all that kind of stuff. So I was constantly moving, but I was also, I think my downtime, which I needed and I still need, was drawing and reading. So those are, and I get the reading from, well, both sides, but really my dad was an incredible avid reader and an editor. That was his job. So yeah, I still need both of those. Like I can't work in my studio to this day without burning off a ton of calories before I spend 4 hours in there. But yeah, I was drawing all the time. I mean, I have my sketchbooks from years ago, which some of them are a little horrifying, but I oddly was drawn to architecture. And I spent a great deal of time drawing floor plans and houses and you name it.
Like as a kid, you were doing that before you went to school?
Oh, yeah. Yep. And actually we lived in a town in Connecticut, Westport, which actually had a really great it was an arts town, so to speak. And the schools, my high school was really an arts high school. I mean, it was really remarkable what it offered.
Well, I want to talk about when you went to college and what you studied. But before that, when we were talking on the phone the other day, you mentioned something that I had not heard before. But when you were a kid, you ended up, you mentioned that you had ants in your pants. You have to burn energy. You're athletic, but you had a speed bump, I guess, that created a situation where you had to sit still probably a lot more than you wanted to. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we were in a fairly bad car accident when I was probably, I would say 10. And it was a snow situation coming back. I think we were at my grandmother's coming back, and my brother was in the car with a friend and the dogs. And it was night. It was snowing like crazy. We were in one of those huge old Ford Lunker station wagons. And it was a 6-car pileup. And it was just one of those things where you couldn't see a thing. And we broadsided someone who had jumped the median. So I, hit the dashboard. We have a huge dashboard. I was pretty little then, but I was trapped in my seatbelt. There was no such thing as a shoulder belt then. It was just the lap belt. And they had to cut me out of that. And my doctors I've had many people look at x-rays, and there's definitely trauma to certain parts of my spine. And that's what they think caused the scoliosis. So then I was my poor mom had to make a decision. My mom and dad had to make a decision to go the back brace or, major surgery routine when I was like 12. And I chose the back brace because I did not want to be in a body cast for a year. And I knew somebody who had been in one, and you just can't move. And that means they actually surgically put a steel rod in your spine to straighten it. And I just couldn't imagine having something like that attached to me for the rest of my life. So I chose the body brace, and boy, did I beat that thing up. Oh my God.
But like when you look back on that time as, now decades out from that, what do you see as that? Because, I'm sure that was not great and pretty awful at times for a kid.
It was.
And a lot of times, and I'm not trying to like speak for you, but it seems like for myself and some folks I know that sometimes the most challenging times can end up being pretty formative and really direct you to who you end up being. And if you're excited about who you are, you owe those experiences something.
Absolutely.
So yeah, looking back on that time, how did that affect your development as the artist you became?
Well, it made me, I had a really hard time. It's so funny. I went in, I knew I had no choice. We talked about it at length with my parents, and I knew I really didn't have any choice because actually we had a dear friend of my parents who had a C curve. And so she was terribly deformed. And I was very fortunate. I didn't have that. I have 2 S curves. So you really can't tell unless you look closely. But, it was so funny. I don't know. I was fascinated by how they made the brace. So I kind of went into it with like, okay, I don't really have any choice. This is what I'm doing. Am I going to be bummed out at times? Yes. Am I going to lose friends? Yes. Because I knew that feeling of sort of, those were the years of, that was an era of quite a bit of bullying. It's just the way it was back then. It was in the early 70s, late 60s. But the whole brace, I was fascinated by going to the orthopedics and seeing all these families with little kids, whole entire families of 3 and 4 kids in these braces, little kids. And I was just like blown away. I'm like, wow, I am so lucky. This is crazy. And then the brace builder and it was hysterical. It was like way up in the 90s on Lexington and in New York City. And, you look up, it's one of those storefronts where you looked up to the second floor and you see things hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
Like fake limbs and it was a walk up. And I think he was great. I give him credit. Every time he knew I was coming, he just rolled his eyes because I broke the thing so many times. I mean, I just... I come in with duct tape it was fiberglass molded over 1/4 inch thick leather molded to my hips. And then I had 2 steel rods going up the back and a steel rod going up the front and a, whole chin thing, the whole deal. And it was crazy. But the bolt in the back of it that held the back together, was like back in the day, it was like $35 stainless steel bolt. And I think I lost that thing like 5 times. And he was appalled. I think he couldn't wait until I was no longer his client. But,
although he probably lost a lot of revenue when you were no longer his client.
God. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I remember going to my, and I had a couple of friends that hung out, and I still played tennis. I wasn't allowed on the tennis team, even though my doctor wrote notes. It was just ridiculous. But I remember going to tennis camp with my friend, and it was like in the 90s. And, they put me in the lower level because I was a liability, whatever. But my brace was just soaked through. I mean, it was just awful. And so I remember we'd hang it in the window after tennis camp, my roommate and I, and, she was great. She was my tennis partner for a really long time. It's just like, really, I'm really dealing with this, but you have to laugh. I mean, right? I didn't really have much choice.
Well, that's one thing I want to ask you about that. You say you have to laugh, but I think a lot of people would not laugh. A lot of people would be angry or feeling sorry for themselves. I mean, I even think about myself, and I have to like It's like moving mountains for me. I'm like, I'm not going to be a pessimist, but I am a pessimist, but I force myself to be I try to act like an optimist in the hope that if I keep acting like it, maybe one day I will be. So, I mean, are you just hardwired, optimistic, thankful, grateful? Because like you said, you were a kid and you saw other families and you're like, you're grateful. That's not how my brain works, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yes. Did I get bummed out? There was no question about that. I mean, plus I had braces on my teeth. I mean, I was a kind of a walking, don't get struck by lightning type of thing. But I was just like, this is what it is. I can deal with this. I was allowed to take it off for like an hour and a half every day. And during that hour and a half, depending on the season, I was either swimming 100 laps or doing all my exercises or, running or riding my bike or doing whatever. It was just the one thing I do remember my mom really went to bat for me on was the doctor said, well, she really shouldn't ski. And my mother's just saying, you can't tell her that, because that's what we did as a family. And so he said, well, okay, but then she has to always ski with someone. And I said, I can do that. Because if I fell, I wouldn't be able to get up. And it was true. We rented a house with a family and we all went sledding or tobogganing one night under a full moon. And I flipped over and ended up in a tree well and no one came looking for me. And it's just stuff like that. It's like, so anytime I see a turtle on his back, I'm like, I don't worry, I'll help you.
That was the image I just had in my mind, but I didn't want to say it. So,
you have to laugh. What was I doing? I was looking up through the pine trees at the full moon and it was snowing and it was pretty beautiful. So anyway, they did come and rescue me. They let me sit there for a while just out of spite because that's what you do when you're 12, 13 and 14 years old.
That's right. No, that's right. So when were you able to kind of free yourself of that? Of the brace?
I think like the Forrest Gump scene when he's running down the driveway and everything falls off. I think I had to wear it part-time and I want to say I was about 16. So I wore it pretty much part-time at night or whenever I got home from school after I was doing all my, crazy, they finally allowed me on the tennis team and, all that kind of stuff. I was running. And so I think I did not have to take it to college with me. Thank God. But so I had, sort of that time where I was a little bit more free. And I'll back up a little bit. My parents were great. They could tell that there were times where I really, really had a hard time. And we actually had a canoe and they would go, let's go canoeing. And, so we would go canoeing. And I do remember just feeling that was such a great release. But I also seen pictures of myself at that time. And I definitely didn't have the most cheerful look on my face, but it was hard. I think socially it was really awkward. But the funny thing was when I got it off in high school, I said to, I had a couple friends who hung out with me and I said, okay, I'm going to get it off. I'm getting it off next week. Let's just see when the first date happens. And it was literally 3 weeks later. A guy came up to me. He goes, oh, so you got that thing off? Do you want to go to the movies? And I'm like, oh, seriously? What are you kidding me?
That's really crazy.
I can't make it up. But my parents are great. They actually, my mom had a studio in the basement. My dad had his editing office upstairs. And we had a very modest small house. But they allowed me to have a studio in the sunroom, which was a 3-season room. And that was my room to just do whatever I wanted in art-wise. And it was really helpful to have that.
So you go to college to study architecture, is that correct?
No, actually, I was in college. My high school was so art-oriented that by the time I got to college, there were a couple of us that were 2 years ahead. And so I took all the prerequisites. Then I was allowed my junior and senior year to sort of write my own program.
Oh, wow.
I was given a studio. Yeah, and I had a mentor, my drawing teacher, who I still stay in touch with. we're pen pals. He doesn't have a computer, and we just do beautiful handwritten letters to each other. It's amazing what he can fit on one page. So it was really great program for me. I had looked at a lot of art schools, but I also wanted to play tennis, and I wanted to sort of do the art athlete thing. So I did that, and I took an art history course that was the history of architecture. And that really was like, wow, that's right. I've been doing all these floor plans. This is great. And then after college, I was looking at grad school, and my parents were like, we really think it would be great if you sort of followed the architecture path for a little while, because it's something you've always really wanted to do. And I ended up taking drafting courses at a community college, and it was with the plumbers and electricians and some designers and stuff. And I loved it. And that's how I got my first job with Fine Home Building magazine. I worked for them for, like 10 years.
So what'd you do for them? We haven't talked about this. What was that? What was that like?
I was an architectural illustrator.
Oh, man.
And I was, they really, really believed in hand-drawn work. And there were a couple of us that worked for them. I was on staff, and basically blowing up houses on a piece of paper so you can see the different levels of the construction and renovations that were done. And it was a great job. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Some of those drawings were 100 hours though. And it was a lot of work, but I had a great designer that I worked under. And then I went freelance for, probably about 6 years after I went freelance, because I was having a hard time concentrating in the office. The editors were kind of chatty. So I worked for them freelance for like 4 years, and I did some other design work for some of their annual things that they did. Like they kind of put together some of their best articles on certain houses and published an annual thing. And so I was the art director for those, and I did a lot of the drawings for those and stuff. But it was great. It was awesome.
Well, I would imagine that I hear a lot about different writers and writers that worked like people that end up writing nonfiction books or whatever, but some of them had spent time either working at magazines or newspapers where they had deadlines. And so like they were, in a way like a hired gun, and they were saying, you need to produce this by this amount of time. And it gets them in the process of producing work. And a lot of those people, they don't understand the idea of writer's block. Because they're like, for 15 years, I had to have this thing done by the deadline, and that's all there was to it. And so when they're on their own, they just know how to crank. And it sounds like, did you have a similar experience with that? Like you just learned how to be creative when you had to?
Yeah, fortunately it was bi-monthly. So, but our deadline, so we worked really, really hard, but our deadline basically started, I'd say, the real rush started like 2 weeks before deadline. And it was just crazy. I mean, Fine Home Building early on was probably the first magazine, believe it or not, in the nation that went to page make. I remember Time magazine came to visit us because it was in its infancy. I mean, we were hand designing everything until sort of page make came through. It was crazy. I mean, hand kerning spaces between letters and plotting points. And now it's all done for you. It was kind of fascinating. And it was before the CAD, architecture CAD system came out. So everything was hand drawn. Yeah. So I was plotting perspective points, and it was fascinating. I loved it. I loved every aspect of it, except that it was very tough in the office with, I was kind of in a large room with lots of editors and stuff. And it was very tough to really concentrate. I'd take everything home with me at night and on the weekends, these huge drawings, because it was really hard to concentrate. And yeah, deadline, it was a tough deadline. But that said, deadlines are good.
Yeah, well, they're good for me, but I'm not a good artist. So were you doing outside projects, or were you getting your fill of art professionally for the paycheck? Or because sometimes I've heard of people that when like artists or whatever their art is, when they get outside of work, they do the exact opposite. Like I heard a funny thing, Conan O'Brien, when he was like writing at Saturday Night Live, there was a picture of him when he finally went on vacation, and he's reading The Rise of the Third Reich about Hitler. Because he's like, I need opposite. I don't need funny. Were you still doing your own projects on the side?
Yeah, I was always, especially when I went freelance, because when I was freelancing for them, I was just doing the major drawings and a little bit of the art director work for the sort of the annual thing. But that allowed me to start really doing some of my own work. And that's when the boys kind of were born around then, and the babysitter and everything. But I was still working at night on these really massive drawings, and it was great. I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot. Don't get me wrong. I mean, at one point, my doctor looked at me. He was, "Okay, so you've had pneumonia twice now. I think you better take a break. Do you really need to do this?" I'm like, I do. But so I figured it out. I mean, I definitely sort of pared things back a little bit. And then when we moved to Portland, the West Coast, the boys were like, what were they, 7 and 9, I guess. And that's when I really had to sort of stop helping with the magazine and just jumping on board with my own work. For sure. So,
was there a specific point? See what the phase you're talking about in your life right there? That's the exact phase that I'm in right now.
Yeah.
Only I'm the silly dad. I'm not the all important mother. I just different kinds of important though. I think, but I'm the professional comedian according to my girls, and my wife keeps everybody alive, so that's a little different. Was there a point? Was there like a specific moment when you knew that you had enough going on your own of your own projects that that could be its own thing? Or was it more of kind of a slow burn over the course of many, many years? I mean, was there was there some point when you sold a piece of work to somebody and you're like, oh my God, somebody bought this. I can't believe it. Or was it more of like a slow process of kind of accepting it?
Yeah, kind of a slow process. I mean, I had a guy who was sort of did shows and stuff. When I was in Connecticut, I would do stuff and, my work at night, and he was great. I had a show with about 4 or 5 people. And then when we moved to Portland, Hank he was traveling a lot and he was just really busy. But I always had worked in the kids' art rooms, like with the art teacher. So I was sort of the person to come in and do the big projects. And that was really, really fun. I mean, when they were in elementary school, I came in and the fire department got mad at me, but we did this with like 3 or 4 different classes. We created this like 60-foot long, Chinese dragon for the Chinese New Year. And every kid created some part of it. And we stuck it up all over the walls. The fire department let us have it up for like 4 days, and they're like, this is coming down. But I did a lot of projects like that. And we actually worked with, in Portland, very, very fortunate to we were in a little independent school district, K through 8, and we had our own art building, which is very, very unusual, with our own art teacher. And so I helped her a lot. I substituted quite a bit, but we also did major projects with some artists that famous artists that actually came to the school and worked with the kids. So that was really, really fun. And then I was working in my studio and being the soccer mom and the lacrosse mom and the hockey mom and, all that stuff. But I loved it. I mean, I just love having a lot of things on my plate to a point, but I really enjoy variety. I guess it's the buffet that I really like.
Yeah, well, I see that in your work, which I want to talk about in just a second. But then also, when you talk about your background, like you were a really serious athlete, but then also a very serious artist, and it's kind of like you cover the full spectrum, which I think is interesting, and I think your art does. Look, when I start talking about your art, you just gotta take it with a grain of salt, because I'm the least qualified person in the world to be talking about art. So you can just ignore it or tell me to be quiet. Kind of jumping forward a little bit, and thankfully it's my podcast, so I can jump as much as I want. How do you describe your art? Because I think it's so unique, and it seems to me to be so varied. Like there's a lot of you have different mediums, there's different styles. When you look in the Headwaters book, just flipping through the pages, you see a lot of kind of varying styles that again, maybe could be seen as being on different ends of the artistic spectrum. So I'd love to hear you describe your art today.
So there's about 3 or 4 different things I do. So I paint, which I never really liked painting in college. It just wasn't my thing. I was a really big printmaking and drawing were my things, which are still some of my favorite things to do. I love drawing. I've always loved drawing. It's just, it's just part of me. It's studying the land. It's researching the landscape. It's diving really deep into geology and water and issues and, habitats and ecotones, which are the edges of habitats, and diversity of habitats and arid land. And it's light, it's a buffet thing, Ed. And I think I probably am scattered all over the place. And I'm always trying to corral my ideas and my thoughts together. And sometimes the projects I really like to take on, sometimes they just get too broad and I don't even know what to do about them. But that's kind of it. And it's really about the land. It's about this place we live and the earth that we walk on and how we've treated it. And I mean, there's so much drama, human drama in this world, yet without clean water and, fresh air, wouldn't even be here to talk about the drama. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I'm just fascinated. I'm so fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by culture, and how we use the land and how we've used the land historically. I think part of that goes back to my dad was an editor of anthropological texts, and I read them all as a child. And I was so fascinated by the different landscapes that, say the Eskimos lived in, or the Native American Plains tribes lived in, or the Yanomamo and the Amazon forest lived in. I was just so fascinated by all of that. And yes, I read them all and I have them all. And if you took anthropology in college, you probably read those case studies too. So
unfortunately in college, all I learned how to do is draw supply and demand curves. I'm really good at that. No, I thought that the way what you were just talking about reminded me of this document that you sent, Water and Land, Observing Our Natural Resources. And there's a sentence in here that says, I try to revere the land and water in my art as a way of honoring not only the resources we use, but also to honor those who work hard to raise our food, harvest our timber, and dedicate their life work to making sure we have clean water and open spaces to enjoy. So not only are you an awesome artist, you're an awesome writer. And I encourage people to go to your website because there's your artist statement, your bibliography, which I want to talk about because I love that idea of having a bibliography. There's a lot of cool stuff here that I'm so excited to talk about. And one of them is your Water and Words project. I feel like everything on your website gives a really good representation, but I feel like this Water and Words project is really just a great example of your collaboration, your love of conservation, your love of land, water, combining different art forms across the spectrum. So can you describe that? First of all, how did the Water and Words project come to your brain? How did you all right, I'm going to devote I've got limited attention, limited time. I'm going to devote it to this project.
Oh my gosh, that was years and years. So I'm a huge reader, but I'm also an annotator. You never want to borrow a book from me because it's dog-eared and it's got ink all over it.
Same. I won't loan mine out because I'm embarrassed that people read the notes.
And I do, I have notebooks that I take notes on. I'm probably the only person to this day sitting on the airplane now that is actually reading a book and taking notes with a pen and a piece of paper. Is pretty funny. But I do that all the time. And I borrow thoughts and quotes from some of my favorite authors. And I kept thinking, well, I don't want to, sir, these people are really famous and everything, but who do I know that's working really hard on the land or on the water that I'd love to honor with, selfishly some of my artwork and get to know these people a little better. And I knew most of them really well. So it all came along with that. What does water mean to you? That's the question I ended up asking. I probably asked 14 people and I really got 11, which actually was perfect because the project ended up being really big. It took over a year and a half to finish the project. And I ended up, I wanted half of them to be female. I think I have 5 female women in there. but it was great. I mean, it was such a great project. And Dylan Tomine was one of the first people that I asked.
Describe the what it is for folks who, because people will go and look it up. People can click through, but for people driving or whatever, give a quick description of it.
So it's a little old fashioned because I'm a printmaker. So it is a 14-page portfolio with a cover, hand printed. It's all hand printed cover with an introduction, and then 11 pages of people that I asked to answer the question, what does water mean to you? And each one of their, sort of beautiful series of words, some poetic, some a little bit more scientific, are silk screened on a piece of paper, beautiful printmaking paper, that's actually complemented by an image that I've drawn either to a place I've been with that person. One of the guys is from Alaska, and so his image is from a river we floated together. Or it's an image of something that has to do with what that person wrote. And it was so fun for me. I was kind of selfish, but, because I wanted to meet these people. But
I know the feeling. I know the exact feeling of that with this podcast.
You mentioned that before. But really what I wanted to do, it was my way of thanking them in an odd way, of thanking them and honoring what they've done, because none of these people ask for any kind of, attention or any kind of kudos or anything about what they do every day, whether it's saving rivers or, whatever it may be. And it was a fascinating group of people to work with. And I'm really, really glad I did it. So
I think I'm not trying to say I'm doing anything nearly as cool as you are, but in a way, this project, it reminds me in a bit of this podcast, because there's people like you have Dylan, who's this amazing artist, amazing writer, and then you have Joe Whitworth, who's doing some of the most innovative, high tech water conservation work for the Freshwater Trust anywhere in the world, and people from the Nature Conservancy. And it's just this broad range of people who are deep thinking and have an artistic streak and are able to write, try to put their thoughts into words. How is it for you, both on this and on the Headwaters book? Just my personality, if I were trying to compliment somebody's words with art, I would be nervous about it. I'd be like, oh man, like how do I, this is just how my weird self, but it's kind of like, can I do justice to these people's words? And so how is that for you, taking these people's thoughts that have been put on paper and then you coming up with art from your brain and your perspective that complements what they do? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying, it was an idea I had for a really long time. And then I finally let it out of the bag. And I think we were having dinner with Joe Whitworth when we were in Portland, and I let it out of the bag, and he's like, yeah. You'll probably never do that because it's a huge project. I mean, it ended up being an edition of 14. So, you're talking about 14 pages in edition of 14. To get to that edition of 14, we needed to print like 25 of everything. Mm-hmm. So it was an enormous project. But I think it sort of flowed pretty easily. Mm-hmm. But once I sort of let it out of the bag, I'm like, oh God, now I have to do it. Because I'm one of these people that if I have a goal and I say I'm going to do something, I do it, even if it just about, wrecks me. And so before I really committed to it, I work with a master printer, and I asked him, he and I have been working together for about 12 years. And I asked him, I said, are you up for this? This is going to be a big project, And he said, yes. And I'm like, okay, great. And then it just, the drawings, I mean, I really waited for some of the people I knew really well. And so I sort of knew what drawing would go with what they wrote. Other people I didn't know that well, so I sort of really waited to hear from them. There was one person, Rachel Finn, who's an amazing artist and fly fishing guide in the Adirondacks. She really didn't want to, she's like very shy and about doing it. I can't write, I can't. And she wrote the most beautiful thing. And so it was just fascinating. It was really interesting. And then, there were a couple of people who were like, here, have this. And I go, well, that's a little long. Well, you can edit it. I'm like, oh my God. And that was Spencer Beebe. He was pretty funny. I mean, he just, because he always, everything he does is with huge passion. So, he was sort of like, this is how I feel. And, his is really great. But I did have to edit that down a little bit so it would fit on the page. But I really enjoyed sort of matching up my drawings with, and there actually ended up being what's called a drawing was transferred into a solar plate. The name of those things has changed so many times now because the companies have gone out of business and everything. But it's basically a solar plate edition, which is sort of like a photosensitive plate that you end up printing from that. So my master printer was great with that because actually a quarter of the way into the project, the solar plate company in Japan went out of business.
Really?
So there was another company working on solar plates and we were able to get them, but it was a completely different emulsion with a completely different sort of exposure time. So it was very tricky. And I would never have been able to do this project without my master printer, Christopher Shore. He was awesome in all his technology and stuff. But I designed all the pages by hand, just like I would have done at the magazine. And it was great. It was a lot of work. A lot of weekends spent in my studio getting ready, to give him stuff so he could produce it. And we produced, I think the first edition got produced in January of 2017 because I had a show deadline.
Yep.
At a show deadline of early March. It was being shown for the first time. So yeah, we worked hard, got that done. And since then it's traveled to, I don't know, 8 different states.
Wow.
Yeah. The last big show was at the San Francisco Public Library. It was a show on artist books in the environment from the Codex Foundation. I was really honored to be included in that. So it comes and goes. Like now, it's kind of sitting in my studio, waiting for the next event, whatever that might be. I don't know.
Well, now we can actually do events. Your timing on that was actually good because by the time when you finished up with it, there wouldn't have been an option anyway. But now we're kind of getting back into that. So
right, and the San Francisco Public Library had actually just opened like 3 days a week. And I remember my oldest son, who lives in San Francisco, was able to go see the show, which was great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you were obviously connected with Dylan for this project. How did it come about for you to be connected? How did you get involved with his book, Headwaters?
So he was, we were always going back and forth. And I can't remember, I think he posted something on Instagram. I can't remember what it was. And so I sent him a little drawing. I said, well, I can't even remember what it was, what the context of it, any of it was. And he said, oh, this would be, let's collaborate. So it was kind of still in, I think, his writing phase. And at that point, I don't even think there were a whole lot of ideas of how the whole thing was going to unfold. But he just said to me, well, what do you think? And so I read the whole manuscript and I just started sending him things because I could tell that he still wasn't really, neither of us were really clear on how it was going to look or what. He knew what he wanted, but he didn't know how he wanted it to look. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
And, I started with pen and ink and then I ended up with just my hand-drawn, pencil. And colored pencil, believe it or not, colored pencils that I had since my architectural drawings of 30 some odd years ago. So that was pretty cool to reuse all those boxes of things in my studio. And interestingly enough, these drawings were very similar in many ways to all the work that I did for Fine Home Building magazine because it was all hand drawn and it was all color pencil and same type of thing. We had to sort of figure out the spacing of the book, which the designer and the editor helped with. And we started out, believe it or not, with 8 drawings, and we ended up with over 30.
Yeah, definitely a lot more than 8. I'm actually.
He kept lobbying. It was hysterical, and they were great. They kept saying, oh, what do you need for this, and what do you need for that, and he kept lobbying for me, and I kept the only way to show is to do it and show it. And I did it, and I showed it. And the sort of gatekeepers for the final decisions in the book realm there are Melinda Chenard and her daughter. And so that was a little yikes moment, but they actually really loved the drawings, and she loves color. So, and Dylan loves black and white. So it was a happy meeting of the two, the way the black and white drawings went with his vignettes or his sort of memories in the book. And then the color drawings went with some of the other portions of the book.
It really is it's a work of art in every sense of the word, because it's for people who haven't listened to my interview with Dylan. You should go back and listen to that. But the book is published by Patagonia Books, and I've had the pleasure of having a number of different authors on that have published with Patagonia Books. Rick Ridgway is one. And these books, it's funny because as Patagonia does, they're doing the exact opposite in the publishing industry of what everybody else is doing. I think everybody else seems to be cutting costs and trying to do things cheaply. And Patagonia is putting out these books that they're like coffee table book quality, and you want to keep them and you want to display them. And they have beautiful, in Francie's case, beautiful artwork. And then in Rick Ridgway's case, all these unbelievable photographs. And they're just the kind of books you want to flip through. And I'm such a fan of what Patagonia Books is doing. And they introduced me to you. So even better.
Yeah, totally. But no, they were great to work with. And it was so interesting. The cover was, Dylan knew what he wanted for the cover, and everybody's like, no, that is going to look like a book of poetry. Not that a book of poetry is bad, but it was funny when you sort of go towards the marketing publicist side of it, what sells and what they think won't sell. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
For what the title is. And then, whoa, there's never been a book on fly fishing that doesn't have a fisherman on the front.
Yeah, somebody holding a big old fish with a big old smile on their face. I mean, and this one is
down that path. And I said, I don't put people or buildings, even though I used to draw buildings like crazy. There are no structures ever, or people or buildings or anything in my artwork. And I said, I just don't. I mean, I'll draw you a boat and I'll do this and I'll do that, but I'm not going to put a fly fisherman in a place. It's just not going to look right.
Well, and what's cool, I mean, you hear just constantly about the suits, in the business side of things, whether it's the music industry, the movie industry, comedy, publishing. There's the creative ones, and then there's the audience, and in between are the suits who are going to screw everything up and dull it down. But Patagonia is the exact opposite. If anything, they encourage the creativity and let the product speak for itself. And that's not me like blowing smoke Patagonia. I mean, it's just a fact. And when you look at what they're doing, it's just like, to anybody, you just have to have vision and you can look and see that they're doing things differently. They're not gumming up the process with a bunch of MBA nonsense. And so I'm a super fan.
It's really interesting. And so the cover was literally the last thing chosen. And they asked me what I had in my studio, because I didn't do that painting for the cover. These were just images that were in my studio. And I just sent them out a bunch of quick images to the designer. And, initially she's like, oh, no, I don't think so. And then she sat on them for a while, and she pulled out the Alaska painting. And she did a mock-up and she sent it around, and everybody was just like, yes. And I'm like, there you go. You didn't, it wasn't exactly what everybody wanted 3 months ago, but hey, guess it worked in the end. And I think they did a beautiful job. I think she did a beautiful job laying the book out. And I know we worked hard trying to make sure that the drawings were done accordingly to the chapters so that there wasn't some big gap. And Melinda Chenard doesn't like white pages. So we worked really hard to make sure things fit properly. So there was no sort of blank space. Mm-hmm. But it was great. It was a great project to work on, and changed my eyesight a little bit, but that's okay.
No, I love it. And I'm looking at mine right now. And speaking of, you talking about writing and dog earing, I have written all over this thing. I might need to get another pristine version. Actually, I like this version because it reminds me of being in New York with y'all. Speaking of books, I know we've already talked about this a bit, but books are such a huge part of your life. And there's something on your website that I think I'm going to borrow or just straight up steal from you. And you have a bibliography for your work, for you, these books that have played a big role in your life and in your artistic process. And I think that's such a cool idea because obviously on my site, I have tons of books, but I've never really thought about it as like, if I had to have a bibliography for myself, what would that look like? So talk a bit about the type of books you like to read. What strikes you? Are you more of a fiction or nonfiction or all the above? Talk about reading.
Having grown up in, a family where your father's an editor, there are just books everywhere. I mean, we do have a book problem in our house, that's for sure.
You could console my wife.
Oh my goodness, I know. I'm just to say one thing about the bibliography. Most artists that put a bibliography on their website, it's things that have been written about them.
Yes.
But I just decided books have been such a huge part of my path in the studio that I really wanted to just put down everything. And this is what's on my website is literally probably about a half or a quarter of what I've read, has influenced me. But that said, I'd say one of the first things that I became really aware of in my family were the field guides that we had lying around. And I honestly inherited a lot of my grandmother's books. But I have her field guide to the ferns, and inside are pressed ferns that she picked in New Hampshire. I mean, I have stuff like that. So, and big birders in the family. And one of the first field guides I bought early on was a field guide to the weather because I was fascinated by that. And I took it everywhere. So I would have to say, field guides are probably factual. They're not really nonfiction, but they're reference, correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
But one of my favorite little books that I found, and I'm pretty sure my dad had it in his sort of anthropological world, is called The Immense Journey. And it's by Lauren Isley. I don't know if you've heard.
No, I've never heard of it.
Okay. He wrote this book in the 1940s. I'm sure you've heard of the quote, which, if there is magic on this planet, it is contained in water. So, yes. I carry this book everywhere I go. It's small enough where it fits on every single trip, and it's very dog-eared and everything like that. But I'm pretty sure my dad met him. My dad met sort of all of the top anthropological people at these conferences and stuff, like Jane Goodall, and he met everybody. So I'm pretty sure he met Lauren Isley. But this book is fantastic. A couple of the other nonfiction would be Two in the Far North by Marty Murray, Where the Crooked River Rises by Ellen Waterston.
These are all new to me, which is awesome.
She's a really interesting writer, and she was a rancher. She lives in Bend now, but she was a rancher in southeastern Oregon. And I got to sort of know of her. She's a friend of friends of ours in Bend, but I did a couple of residencies in Playa, which is in Summer Lake, Oregon, which is about 2.5 hours east of Bend, in the middle of the Oregon outback. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah, so she's a really good writer. Most of these books have a lot of grit to them. There's something about that sort of grittiness that I really like. One of my favorite books is Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman by Miriam Horn. I think I've read that 3 times now. That is a fascinating take on the Mississippi watershed from, Montana all the way to Pennsylvania, and how we utilize ranching, farming, fishing, you name it. She is a remarkable researcher and author. I believe she's a journalist. And then Refuge by Terry Tempest Williams is an old favorite. I used that numerous times when I was studying Great Salt Lake for a show. Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez. And then his new book, Horizon, which sort of his last book that he finished before he passed away.
Is that a good one?
It's really good.
Read it.
It's really good. I actually wrote him a thank you note, and he wrote me back, handwritten. No, we went back and
Did he really?
A little bit. Yeah. He was a remarkable, amazing writer.
Well, there's on your website, on your bio, there's a quote from him. I'll read it. It says, "To really come to an understanding of a specific American geography requires not only time, but a kind of local expertise and intimacy with a place few of us ever develop. If you want to know, you must take the time. I thought that was so. I have not read much of his stuff at all, but everybody that I admire has, so I need to get on it.
Yeah, it's just he's amazing, and it is about taking the time. And maybe that's one of the gifts I seem to have as I get older, is that I force myself to carve out more time, and each year I make a goal of how much time I'm, the importance of being outside, whether it's hiking, and everything I do has to do with my work, and I sit out there and take notes or whatever I do, but it's about that time outside that's the most important thing. One of my favorite books that I also read when I was actually studying the Great Salt Lake was Buffalo for the Broken Heart.
Ooh, I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because he gets some of his buffalo from that herd on the Antelope Island, which I've visited numerous times, one of my favorite places. John McPhee, Basin and Range, which is just geology at its finest, one of my favorite things. And then the Birch Bark Canoe. So, because I was a canoe guide in my 20s, a whitewater canoe guide in northern Maine. And I just love that book, The Birch Bark. I probably don't have the exact right title, but it's sort of how birch bark canoes were made, and he sort of breaks it down to what indigenous people used, which materials to make, the shapes of them. It's really fascinating. It's really, really fascinating.
He's such a master at taking just some very obscure subjects. Like I read a book by him, and it was all about, the only thing it was about was oranges. And it was like the most interesting thing I've ever read. And I know I have all these random facts about orange. If I ever go in Jeopardy and the category's oranges, I'm going to win. And then he wrote another book. It's either called Draft Number 3 or Draft Number 4. I can't remember, but it's his like instruction manual on writing. And what's interesting is it's more like an engineering manual. Like, I mean, the amount of time that guy spends on structure and planning, and it goes to show you that he's considered one of the masters of writing, and it's not an accident. I mean, the guy, he might as well be an engineer when it comes to his structure. So I need to read more of his stuff. His Encounters with the Arch Druid, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, he's just a fantastic writer, especially if you're interested in anything, but he really has taken sort of geology, and going from east to west across our country of how the geology morphs and what happens. I mean, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So that's kind of my short list of, I have a really long, I think you're right. I think I'm more like you in the nonfiction. I never really thought about that before, but the nonfiction seems to be sort of my big category, but I do have some very, very favorite fiction.
What's your favorite novel?
Well, growing up, one of my favorites was obviously Steinbeck's Red Pony, and then Old Yeller.
Oh yeah. Oof, that's.
And I really love what Rick Bass writes. I really love his work. And actually Dylan introduced me to a great book of his called Where the Sea Used to Be. And it's about, he writes a lot about the Yak wilderness. That was really good. But so when we were, just a little aside here, but when we were picking, images for the cover of Headwaters, or the kind of running joke was, buy the book for the cover type of thing. And I have to say, the only time I did that, I think I bought one of my favorite books. And I was in Powell's. We were in Portland for a Water and Words event. And I walked into Powell's bookstore, and I was looking for, something small that I could travel with, blah, blah, blah. And I came across this amazing book by Smith Henderson called 4th of July Creek. Mm-hmm. And the reason I pulled it out, it was probably one of the bigger books in the bookshelf. And the reason I pulled it out was because a dear friend of mine, a woodcut printer named Brian Nash Gill, his work was on the cover. And he had passed away before the book came out, I believe, at a young age. It was, we miss him terribly. But so I literally bought the book for the cover because it was so beautiful. And I absolutely love the book. I've read it probably 3 or 4 times. And it's a very gritty take on families and social structures and family networks in rural Montana.
Cool.
And it really reminded me of when you interviewed that great doctor.
Oh yeah. Eric Arzubi. What a cool guy.
Yeah. And it's just such a great book. It's a really, really fantastic book. And then, I just reread Charles Frazier's 13 Moons.
Ooh, that's so good.
Oh my gosh, that's a good book. I know it's not West, but it's gritty. It's gritty, and then the early books from A.B. Guthrie, The Big Sky and The Way West, that were written in the 1940s. Those are really beautiful books too.
I got Big Sky from the library one time and then somehow got distracted, as I do, and I never read it, but I need to read that. And then 13 Moons reminds me, that when I was in college and grad school, I was in the Appalachian Mountains. Any weekend I wasn't hanging out with my then girlfriend, now wife, I was in that landscape, and I thought it was one of the best descriptions I've ever come across.
And then and another person who writes really well along those lines, sort of Kentucky, is Chris Offutt. Have you ever heard of his Kentucky Straight? And I want to say his other book that I loved is called The Good Brother. He writes really well. That sort of gritty Kentucky Straight, it's a little bit like 13 Moons, but 13 Moons obviously is much more historical. But it's that same kind of grittiness. I don't know what it is about gritty. And I had a stack of books in my studio recently. And I'm like, whoa, those are all women who are like gutting it out by themselves in really dusty, dry places. There was like 10 of them. It's pretty funny.
Those are all awesome. And the vast majority of those I have not read. And so we'll have links for people to click through on that. I just love getting these long lists of books. It's awesome. So last kind of question for you. I'll give you two options, and they may be interrelated, but I generally ask people if they have any parting words or anything like that. You're more than welcome to answer that. The other one is, I know you spend so much time and effort, as does your awesome husband, Hank, working with conservation organizations across the West and across the country. And so another potential question is there anything you're seeing these days that's giving you hope? Because there's so much bad news everywhere you look. What's making you feel good about the world at this point?
Well, I think it's, the people that are working really hard that aren't kind of asking for the credit. Do you know what I mean? There's just so many people out there working to make things better. And I don't know, I try really hard because of what I do and because I'm so linked to the land. Yes, I get incredibly bummed out about certain things. And part of that has to do with these sort of cataclysmic weather events that happen and how that destroys people's lives and land. But it's also, I try really hard to stay away from the bad stuff. I'm, being an artist, I'm a little on the sensitive side, and I just can't let that rule my life. So I try to focus on the people that are doing the right thing or the good thing, or are trying really hard to learn that path. I mean, this is all an evolution for all of us. I mean, we've sort of plundered along our way, and now we have to fix a lot of things, but we're all at a different place of learning how to do that and how to incorporate that into your daily life. So I just think it's, there's certain awarenesses. We just have to be more aware. And it's really important to research and listen, and don't just look at the stuff that comes across your feed first thing in the morning. I don't know. I think of these journalists and what's his name? I'm just reading his book right now, Nate Schweber, and the amount of time it takes him to research something. I think we've all gotten away from that deep research. And I think it was something I was raised with, because we didn't have sort of the instant online thing. You had to go to the library and you had to research it and you had to find out what's going on. And I think if we can dig a little deeper, we'll find more of the good work that people are doing.
I agree with all that. And I think you are doing great work, and I'm excited that we had this opportunity to chat. And I encourage people to click all the links on the webpage to learn more about everything you're doing. But it's been such a pleasure getting to know you, and, meeting people like you and your husband and Dylan and all these awesome people. It just makes me very thankful that from a selfish standpoint, that I started this podcast, because getting to know all you folks, it's enriched my life so much, and it just makes me feel better about everything. And so keep up the great work. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Well, gosh, Ed, thank you. And thank you for posting your good news from the West every Wednesday. I love it.
Good.
That
thank
popped
you.
up Thursday morning in my email, and I'm like, yes. So I really, really appreciate it. And I thank you for all the connections you make. Your podcast is great. I've turned a number of people onto it, and they're just like, whoa, this is awesome. So yay, yay.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.